This is a particularly short sikha. It quotes the Zohar, where the Zohar tells us that there are various things that were used as testimony, one of which is Be'er de Yitzchak, the well of Yitzchak. Now, what's strange about it is that on closer examination, it actually seems to be the well of Avram Avinu. So the Rebbe will quote the classical interpretation of the Ramaz on the Zohar, and then focus on his father's explanation, which will also give us a very important lesson for our lives. Isa b'Zohar, the Zohar tells us, we'll first read it in the original, then translate it into the Hebrew. There are three things that are there to testify and to stand as witness, and they are as follows. So in Hebrew, who are the three? Be'er de Yitzchak, Yitzchak's well. Goyrol, the lottery that was used to divide Eretz Yisrael, so that's testimony that each tribe got what they deserved. Vavne de Shavi Yeshua v'chulei, and the stones that Yeshua put up for the Yidden as they crossed the Yarden into Eretz Yisrael, a reminder that we had committed to Torah and mitzvahs. Asks the Zohar, Be'er de Yitzchak minalan, what is the biblical source for the fact that Yitzchak's Be'er is actually for testimony? Because it says in our parasha, that Avraham Avinu says, let this be a witness, let it be a sign, a reminder to us, testimony to us, that I am the one who dug this well. So that's the question. Avraham Avinu dug the well, so therefore it doesn't seem to make sense. That pasuk that let this be as testimony refers to a well that Avraham Avinu dug. So if that's the case, why would they then call it Yitzchak's Be'er? Avraham dug it, it's not Yitzchak. So the classical commentator, the Ramaz, explains that the statement that the well would be as a sign of testimony, that Avram Avinu was the one who in fact said those words. But the well that Avram dug was Yitzchak's well, which actually just seems to re-emphasize the same question, right? This also needs to be explained. Why would it be logical in any way to suggest that a well dug by Avraham should be Yitzchak's well? So that's our big question on the Ramaz. Let's see how the Rebbe's father explains it. We famously know Reb Leivik wrote his commentary while in exile. He wrote his commentary on the Zohar in the margins. So one of those marginal commentaries goes like this. The fact that we associate this Be'er with Yitzchak, despite the fact that the pasuk clearly refers to Avram, is because of something practical that happened. If you know the history of how the story of the wells went with Avram and Avimelech and the Plishtim, and then Yitzchak and the Plishtim. So what happened was, Be'er Avram, Plishtim achrei Moisei. After Avram Avinu passed away, the Plishtim filled up and blocked those wells. Then Yitzchak chafrei mechadash. Afterwards, Yitzchak came along and he redug the wells that the Plishtim had blocked. As the pasuk tells us, that Yitzchak went back, he returned, and he dug, and he named those wells with the same names that his father had used for, obviously, the same wells. And then Reb Leivik says, have a look at what the Alter Rebbe says in Torah Pashas told us at the beginning. And therefore, once you understand that information, that's why this Be'er is associated by the Zohar with Yitzchak. So yes, it was originally dug by Avram Avinu, but because Yitzchak was the one who gave it longevity, he redug it after the Plishtim had tried to interfere. That's why it's named after Yitzchak, and you have to consult in Torah to understand this better. Now, it would appear that Reb Leivik's explanation is almost the exact opposite of the explanation of the Ramaz. The Pirush HaRamaz, Shaber Shechafer Avram Hu Be'er de Yitzchak. If you read what the Ramaz said, he said, the well that Avraham dug, emphasis, who dug it? Avraham, and yet it is called the Be'er of Yitzchak. Nimtza Shebikar is a Be'er de Yitzchak. That implies that fundamentally we need to know that this is Yitzchak's well. It belongs to Yitzchak. It's just that practically Avram is the one who actually dug it. So Avram almost sounds like the contractor and Yitzchak like the owner. Whereas the Rebbe says in his father's explanation, it sounds the other way around. That it's really Avraham's well. Technical difficulty, the Plishtim interfered. Because Yitzchak arrived afterwards and re-exposed the wells that the Plishtim had blocked after Avraham Avinu had dug them, now we also associate the well to Yitzchak. But it's really Avraham Avinu's well. So according to the Ramaz, it's really Yitzchak's well. It was just dug by Avraham. According to Reb Leivik, it's really Avraham's well. It was just redug by Yitzchak. Because obviously the story of digging wells is not just simply a story of digging wells, but it's a whole theme and a message. So if that's the case, that theme and message has to fit according to both views. That's going to prompt us to ask the question, what is the difference, not just practically, between the Ramaz and Reb Leivik, if Avraham Avinu is the main owner of the well, or Yitzchak Avinu is the main owner of the well, but in terms of what the well represents and the concept of digging wells, what's the difference if the priority is Avraham or the priority is Yitzchak? Also, while we're asking, Madua Ra Amur Bimkoim Lasbir Espirish Ramaz Shehuva Beriba Mikoim Specific Hasidus, how come then did the Rebbe's father not explain the opinion of the Ramaz, as is very often the case in Hasidus, but rather Lefarish Beifan Acher V'Hofchi? Why did he dafka choose to give a different and apparently contradictory explanation? And the hint to all of this, the hint to how to understand exactly what Reb Leivik wanted to convey, he alluded to by saying, look up Torah, or look up Parshas Toldos, see what it says over there. Parshas Toldos. So we'll explore what it says in the beginning of Parshas Toldos in Torah, and that will help us understand all of this. What does it say in Torah? But Torah over there explains, as we all very well know, the primary thrust of Avraham Avinu's dedication and service of Hashem was in the world of Chesed. Chesed is tolerance and kindness and generosity and looking after guests, etc. In spiritual terms, Chesed is Hamshocha milemayla lemata. Chesed is compared to water. Water always flows from a source that is at an altitude down to the sea, which is obviously at sea level. So Chesed is always from the have to the have-not, from the empowered to the disempowered, from above to below. The direction of Chesed is downward flow. By contrast, Yitzchak's avodah is all about the element of gvura, very sincere dedication to the point of willingness to give up his life for Hashem, not leaving a certain set of parameters space-wise because you don't move too much. People must come to you rather than you reach out. And in spiritual terms, what is gevura? Halo milmate lemaila, raising things up from where they are to a higher space, which takes a tremendous amount of strength to be able to do that, to be able to break the bonds of gravity and to be able, spiritual gravity, to be able to lift something up. So Avraham is flow, and Yitzchak is the push, the yearning upwards. Because those are their two primary themes, that's why the Eibishter describes Avraham Avinu as he who loves me. And Yaakov Avinu, when he refers to his father Yitzchak, he calls him the fear of Yitzchak, or at least when he talks about Hashem in relation to Yitzchak, pachad. Because love will associate with and derive from the attribute of chesed, and fear, or better, awe, will derive from the attribute of gevura. So now we know this already. We know that these are the two types of avodah. Let's take that and help use it to help us to understand what digging wells is all about. What's the difference between who's digging the well? Based on the distinction between Avraham Avinu, who is primarily focused on serving Hashem through Chesed, and Yitzchak, who's doing so through Gevura, based on that, there the Alter Rebbe explains how it is possible that when Avraham Avinu digs a well, it's still susceptible to interference, and the Plishtim can come along and they can stop that well from functioning. And that's also why it's only after Yitzchak comes back to the same spot and re-excavates the same wells that now the Plishtim cannot touch them. Now the wells become sustainable. Why is that? Says the Alter Rebbe, the reason is because the particular toxic energy that Plishtim represent, the klipa that they represent, only has capacity to interfere with the healthy energy of chesed and not with the healthy energy of gevura. Okay, so every positive energy that exists in this world has an antagonistic energy as well that can interfere with it. But there's certain immunities. Gevura is immune to the Plishtim. Chesed is susceptible to Plishtim. Why is that? The explanation is like this. Plishtim in Hasidus, the word Plishtim is associated with the word mefulash, which is a mavaya mefulash, an alleyway that is open on either side, meaning to say an unbounded reality, life without appropriate borders. That's the klippa of Plishtim. You don't have appropriate borders. That's why Chazal tell us that Plishtim are by nature scoffers. Nothing is sacrosanct. Nothing deserves their respect. There are no boundaries. There is no hierarchy of wisdom or age or basic principles. We have a view. We're liberally minded. Everybody is equally able to cancel anybody else's opinion. This idea of scoffing, of making fun of things, is exactly the concept of mefulash. There are no boundaries. I don't know how to contain myself. I don't know how to focus myself. When Avram Avinu digs wells, Avram Avinu approaches the concept of digging wells, supplying water, unearthing resources from beneath the earth's surface. He does it bisrachvus, also without limitation, with a hugely wide budget, with this generosity of spirit, which is great. Nuasa ahava. That represents in its healthy form, and Avraham Avinu is absolutely healthy. Love of Hashem, love Hashem. If I love somebody, I'm not going to start penny pinching. I'm not going to start watching the clock. I love you, so I do it absolutely with everything I've got. And as a result of that, I have tainug v'asimcha be'elikus, both pleasure and joy with regards to elikus, bisgabros gedola b'yesa kafi hamida, beyond all reasonable expectations. All in, full throttle. So because Avraham Avinu serves in a healthy way, but without the restraints of Gevura, that leaves his avodah susceptible to a counter energy, which also has no limits, no boundaries, no context. The Plishtim. Because the unfortunate reality is that when you have a tremendous flow of energy, even if the energy originates from a space of Kedusha, because it's an incredible flow of energy, it could also impact and feed and irrigate places that are not so holy. It can give energy to the Plishtim, which is Yisrachos Dilum Azem and Agedes the Kedusha, which would translate into this unbridled sense of self, which is Plishtim, and we can fight anybody and there's no respect for Kedusha, etc. Now, did Avraham Avinu Chas v'Shalom directly lead to the Plishtim having power? Not at all. Let's translate that into human terms. If I'm currently in a state of absolute passion towards Hashem, and so I'm doing things for Kedusha without any thoughts about budgets and about time frames and about my personal limitations, I'm just going all out. At that moment, obviously, I'm not going to do anything wrong. There isn't the possibility, it can't enter the mind. At that time, there's only godly energy that is blindingly real, and that's what I enjoy, that's what I'm excited about. Specifically, though, when that light dims, In other words, the passion ends. Okay, so I was completely passionately excited about something. Now that particular role is over, that particular time frame is over, and now I've still got this spillage of energy, but without the focus. That's a dangerous time where that excitable energy could now become misdirected and translate into flippant behavior or just excitement about things of no value. The pasuk highlights that by telling us, when did the Plishtim have the gall to come along and block up Avram Avinu's wells? Only after Avram Avinu passed away. It's only after that overwhelming sense of divine energy dissipates, represented in our story by the death of Avram, and therefore, all you have now is this openness without meaning. That's when the Plishtim can jump on the bandwagon and infect the system and hijack it. But when Yitzhak digs a well, the Plishtim can't touch that. What does digging a well by Yitzhak represent in human terms, in our avodah? It's where I'm serving Hashem with a sense of Kabbalah's oil. I'm afraid to just do as I please. I want to do what Hashem wants me to do. I'm in awe of Hashem's greatness. I'm going to conform. So therefore the Plishtim, who only have the capacity to work against and in the context of ahava, of chesed, of goodness, they don't speak this language of gevura. They don't know how to deal with boundaries, so they fall back. Oh my gosh, there's clear boundaries over here. This is a very safe system. It doesn't have an opening for getting carried away with yourself and let's have a whole big party. Because the algorithm works that a negative energy can only attack and infect an energy that is similar to it. So chesed de klipa cannot touch gevura de kedusha. Not only that, but not only do the Plishtim have no power over Yitzchak's efforts, more than that, the reality of the story is that these wells were originally dug by Avram Avinu, who is chesed, which is vulnerable to Plishti infection. So, despite the fact that those wells were built on the premise of chesed, now that Yitzchak has entered the space, now the Plishtim can no longer touch those wells because Yitzchak has sealed them and made them safe. Now, to understand this concept will help us to understand where the Ramaz and the Reb Leivik see the story differently. Let's understand what's going on over here. The nature of love is that love emphasizes me. I love. That's why people always take up, well, not always, people sometimes take offense to the phrase, I love you. So I comes first. Or as we call it in the language of Torah, yesh mi she'ohev. There is an entity that is conscious of itself and also loves that which is appropriate to love, in this case Hashem. Whereas when a person is in a state of yira, fear, or better than that, yira, kabbalas oil, complete acceptance of Hashem's authority, then the self shrinks away. For which reason, if a person only serves Hashem just with joy, unfettered joy, as positive as that is, seeing as there is a sense of I mixed in that, even though the I at that point, while you're serving, while you're singing, while you're dancing, while you're hopping up and down, at that point you're completely enveloped in the space of holiness. But but because there's a sense of self, who knows where self goes? Who knows how self-oriented it becomes, how self-aware it becomes? And so therefore, therefore it's possible that the person during the course of davening is so enraptured and so excited and singing and clapping, and straight after the davening, it's possible that that same attitude continues, but now it's no longer in that safe space of davening. And now it's like, let's go out and have a good time because it's all part of the simcha of how you serve Hashem. Dangerous territory. That's where a person becomes flippant and cynical and scoffing, and it's all about fun, and you lose your sense of boundaries. The moment a person realizes that simcha is critically important and equally important is Kabbalah Sol, acceptance of Hashem's authority and being conscious and in awe of Hashem's greatness. Which is the exact opposite. It's not a sense of self, it's a sense of relinquishing self, it's a sense of authority. That protects me, that I cannot start to feed a negative energy even with my simcha. So if I have simcha and I'm unlimited, I'm a lechatchila riber without the sense of Kabbalah Sol, like this, it could translate into something dangerous when I'm not paying close attention. But as long as I have the clear Kabbalah Sol and bittul, that will never happen. Move on. Now we can understand. When you have wells that Avram dug, and then the Plishtim stopped up, and now Yitzchak dug them again, those wells are now safe from the Plishtim. Because when you have Avram Avinu's wells, i.e. the avodah of Simcha, is also balanced with Yitzchak's avodah, which is Kabbalah Sol, then it is protected and cannot leak out into the toxic environment. And so therefore they never stop flowing and never stop providing meaning and sustenance and nourishment and inspiration. So now that we understand that the distinction between Avram and Yitzchak's avodas is that Avram could produce, without proper focus, the potential for self, which could then grow into something unhealthy, whereas Yitzchak safeguards against that. So what are we seeing now? Avram dug the wells. The Plishtim blocked the wells. Yitzchak redug the wells. So whose well is it? It's still Avram Avinu's wells. Because Avram Avinu built something healthy. Simcha and Chesed and Ahava, all of these are healthy things. Avodah Shalab of a Simcha. What did Yitzchak help? Yitzchak came to bolster and secure Avram's avodah. So whose well is it? It's Avram Avinu's well. Why do we call it Be'er Yitzchak? Because Yitzchak came along to give it the sustenance that it needs. That's why the Rabbi Levik's explanation of what does it mean Be'er Yitzchak. He doesn't want to say that the well belongs to Yitzchak, because it doesn't. As the Ramaz wanted to explain. It's Avram Avinu's avodah. It's the avodah of Simcha. That is what we're discussing here. The avodah of Simcha and how you keep it safe. But the avodah of Simcha is also associated with Yitzchak. Why? Because the avodah of Yitzchak secures the avodah of Avram. But be'etzem, we're talking over here about Avram Avinu's avodah. Okay, we're not going to leave the Ramaz unsolved. So what does the Ramaz say differently? That it's really Yitzchak's be'er. It just happened to be dug by Avram Avinu. So how will Chassidus explain the Ramaz's take? Because the principle of digging a well is the avodah of finding something beneath the surface and drawing it to the surface, which generally that is typical Yitzchak avodah. Avodah, the whole thing of Gevura represented by Yitzchak is work with the world to lift the world. That's why the Ramaz says, really, it must be Yitzchak's well, because the whole genre of wells is Yitzchak's world. In this particular case, the actual physical well was dug by Avram Avinu, and so therefore he injected the element of chesed, which is actually milmayla lamata, into this particular well too. It's really interesting because the Zohar actually wasn't analyzing the well. The whole purpose of the Zohar was to tell us that the well is testimony. So the Zohar was focused on the testimony aspect. Which would also explain, according to the Ramaz, why it should be called the Be'er of Yitzchak. Because, and according to Rabbi as well, because what's the purpose of Eidos? Eidos is that something should sustain. Okay, we can prove it's valid. So if it's valid, then it still has validity now. That's the purpose of Eidos. Who gives us the sustainability? Who gives us the Eidos? Yitzchak. The whole purpose of Eidos is if there's anything that's going to interfere. So typical Eidos is if there's any objection to a particular thing, we say, but he has the document, he has the witnesses, he has the proof. Who does that? Yitzchak. So therefore, either way you look at it, if I'm analyzing the sustainability, the eidus of the Be'er, it for sure has to be attributed to Yitzchak. In Rabbi Leivik's explanation, it is fundamentally a chesed avoida that is cemented by Yitzchak. In the Ramaz's view, the whole avodah of Be'eros belongs to Yitzchak. This one happens to have Avram components too. What does that teach us? The way a Jew has to serve Hashem has to be founded on the principles of Kabbalah Sol, of Yira Bittul. Those are key foundations to serving Hashem. The truth is, because Simcha is such a powerful element and such an important part of life, so our avodah requires Simcha as well. The truth is, the Simcha is not supposed to always be detected on the surface. Pashas told us, so but then you have a look at what it says in Torah, that when Yitzchak comes along and he digs the wells, now the well that Avram Avinu dug never stops flowing. That tells us something, not just that Simcha is really important, and you don't necessarily always have to have Simcha at the surface in order to have Simcha, which is probably a very important lesson in its own right, but more than that, the Kabbalah's oil and the sense of bittul maintains Simcha. Maintains the avodah of ahava. If you don't have that, your avodah of simcha runs out of steam. Vayeira. That means that you actually start to serve Hashem from the perspective of simcha. As the Zohar says, there is no service that is like the service of love. But you want the simcha to be long-term, to be sustainable, not just when you're in the mood. To sustain that, you have to first, prior to even having simcha, you have to have, like the Alter Rebbe says, the source and foundation of all avodas Hashem, which is Kabbalah soul, acceptance, a sense of bittul, and then, even though it might sound surprising, your simcha is durable simcha.